And we're going to make a start, introduce all of our wonderful presenters, and we can, okie dokie, let's do this. Share screen, right. I'm excited about this. I've been wanting to get this get started for a couple of months now. Everyone can see my screen. Let's start this thing. Okay, so welcome everyone to today's webinar. We've got some really interesting insights and people to talk a little bit about how to teach media, history through media, art and design. It's something that the panel and myself included are very passionate about. And hopefully today we can give you some resources and some confidence and some things that might be able to help you supercharge your history teaching. And actually, it's not as challenging as you think, but let's talk more about that in a moment. I'm Tara Walsh. Now, you probably have no idea who I am or who Makematic is. So I work at a media company in the UK called Makematic. And my role basically is to work with educators and also the education community to help develop video content, particularly history and civics content, which we'll talk more a little bit later. I used to be a humanities or history teacher, so I have a double passion in this area. So that's why I'm here and why I'm hosting this, but I'm not the expert today. We've got two other really exciting and interesting people that are going to share with you insights, but also more importantly, how you can use media, art and design to make your history classes more engaging and interesting for your students. So how are we going to do this? This whole webinar is going to be run in a couple of sections. The intro we just did. So there'll be more intros. I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful panelists because, it's not a Tara Walsh talk show. Then we're going to look a little bit about the problem of history. Yes, there is a bit of a problem with history. I can't understand it. It sort of blows my mind, but we need to talk about that first. That's the elephant in the room, right? We need to get that over and done with. And then we're going to talk to Nwana and to Nick about how they recommend to use media, art and design to teach history from particular lens that they come from an expert and subject matter expert lens. Then I'll open up for some questions if any of you guys have them, and then concluding statements. And at the end, I want to share with you a swag of free resources that we've created and that some of the organisation that we're working with today have also created that can help you make that journey better. So enough from me. Let's introduce you to the panelists. So we have two incredible panelists, and I'm actually kind of excited that they said yes. I didn't even need to beg, so that was actually kind of cool. So we have Dr. Nwana Lee from Dugudari. Apart from being an awesome person, she's also an expert in art history education, and is working now for Dugudari, but works for Walt Disney Company and a whole variety of other things. And I'm going to get her to introduce herself better than me, but having her today, she's also helped and works as a consultant with us on the untold history content that I'll talk to you more about. So Nwana, hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And have I missed anything? Like, tell in your words, tell us about yourself, because I've probably missed some stuff. Tell me about, why you're here, why you're interested in this subject.
I think you did a pretty good job, but I am here because I just think it's really important that we learn to get our learners to understand the relevance of history. I think that's one of the biggest problems. I know that when we did exit surveys with our students, one of the things they said was that their least favorite class was a history class or math, always math, but
yep.
a history class because they couldn't understand the relevance to their lives right now. So that's one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about this. And when I taught at the University of Georgia, I taught a course on exploring race and racism, the history of it, through art. So that was a very interesting course, and they kept that course in their curriculum lineup that I designed because it was so effective and getting students to engage with the history content. And then I taught at a secondary school, a high school, and I taught there for 10 years and did the advanced placement art history course. So I teamed up with a lot of the history teachers there because they were feeling like the students were actually improving their grade in history after participating in the AP art history course. So I think there's some value there that definitely needs to be shared.
Amazing. Probably the right person to be talking to us today, don't you reckon, guys? And the other great person for us is an educator from California who I met last year. And Nick is a bit of a superstar educator. He works with his class, gets them using active approaches to using media, but also getting kids really engaged in the conversations and the history and civics conversations that actually are quite challenging. I'm not going to tell you guys that it's challenging at the minute. You know that. You know, what would an Australian know from watching out? But it is a challenging topic, and it's one of those challenging subjects that can be really almost off-putting. And Nick has taken a really unique approach, and he's going to talk more about that in a minute. Nick, welcome. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, because I think I haven't done you justice. What have I missed?
Thank you. Really glad to be here. I guess just a little background is I actually started as a social studies teacher, I guess almost 17 years ago now, and did that for about 7 years, and then just something didn't seem right about teaching history. It just, that was really at the time of the, standardized testing and all of that. And it just felt like there was more to be had with the curriculum. And I ended up switching subject areas into art and photography and design for the next 7 or 8 years or so. And then just last year, as you were mentioning, I piloted a new course that linked together a social media class, an art class, with a US history through media design and art, so that kids could get both their history credit and their art credit at the same time, and kind of explore it in a new way. And even though it was during COVID and the environment was changing every other day, it really kind of proved the concept that this was a different way and could potentially be a more meaningful way to kind of engage in history, especially with certain learners and students that have different interests.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I think you guys can probably guess why I chose this to talk to us today. And what they're going to share with you is real, active, practical stuff, right? Like not just the why, the actual how to do it, right, as well. And that's kind of what today's session is about. It's about really getting to the meat and potatoes of it, and actually making sure that you come away with something, hopefully more than one thing, because there's lots to offer. So there is a bit of a problem with history. Quick quiz. I want to see if anyone knows the answer to this. In 2014, there was a national assessment of educational progress and conducted a survey on history and civics education. How many 8th graders were proficient in US history? So pop it in the chat. I'm curious to see what you guys think. But it's, Nick and Nuala, I wonder if you know the answer to this one as well. So I'd be curious to see if you can even hazard a guess. If you have no one's going to respond yet. Come on, guys. All right, I'll give you one more second to see if everyone's a bit shy today. How much percentage? Okay, so Nick, what do you reckon? What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like I should know, because I feel like the first time you and I talked, you mentioned this number. And since I don't know, for some reason, the number 37 is sticking out in my mind. But
okay, 37. That's a good guess. Nuala, what are your thoughts?
Okay, that's probably a better guess than mine, but I wasn't in love with history when I went to school. So I was more thinking maybe 11%.
Wow, it was 18. So you're not too far off. Blows my mind. Actually makes my head want to explode. And what's interesting about that is that some of the most watched content on YouTube is actually history content. So I'm actually thinking, I don't know what's going on. I actually don't know what's going on here. And we're going to explore that a little bit more today. But before we move to that, I actually want to share with you some stuff that I hear from educators every time I do user testing. So over the last couple of years, I've spoken to probably 200 civics and social studies educators about history, and social studies in particular, but history obviously as a part of that. And here's some of the stuff that I've found. Let me just share it with you, because I think actually it does sort of lend us to understanding a little bit why there's a problem. Teaching history is really hard at the moment. It's really difficult. How do I teach it? There's a lack of time to find really good quality resources. I hear this over and over again. You know, teachers, and those of you who are teachers who are listening, are spending a lot of time resourcing your classes. I get it, totally feel it. A lack of confidence in trying new things. There's a crowded curriculum. Yep. If it's not standards aligned, it's just too hard, right? And the other one is, and this is one of the most interesting insights, is I'm a social studies teacher. Oh, I can't spell. I'm a social studies teacher, but not a history teacher. So one of the things I'm finding is that whilst there are a lot of history teachers teaching social studies, if you're coming from a different background, say an economics background or a more, civics focus, although civics is relatively similar, there's that lack of maybe confidence in trying to approach history and the teaching of history in a way that maybe a history teacher would because of their background. I know when I studied history, art was an integral part of how I learned about history and how I talked about history. And so these are the kind of insights that we're getting from user testing, and I'm sure. So Nawad, I want to hear, what are your thoughts? I mean, what is the problem from your perspective? What's the problem with history? I mean, we've looked at these kind of insights from user testing, but I'd love to hear it from your perspective.
Sure. What I found when I've spoken with history teachers is that sometimes they don't see the value in the way that art, design, and media can improve upon or assist traditional approaches to pedagogy. So I think that they consider art, design, and media as bells and whistles. Right? That while the lecture and the discussion are really seen more as valid teaching strategies, so they're really like the meat and potatoes of learning, right? But I would pose that I'm a foodie, and when my blood pressure got too high, my doctor told me no more salt. So my question is, have you ever tried meat and potatoes without salt? It's not very yummy. It's not very yummy at all, right? So without the seasoning, without the bells and whistles, food is terrible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what makes it palatable. And so I would say that art, media, and design are very similar with learning, right? Those are the necessary components that get a student to engage with that learning. So the fact that teachers feel like this is it's just frivolous, it's extra, it's not really extra. It is actually a necessary component because your objective is engagement.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Nick, I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, a few things. I wish I had a food analogy to follow up with on that. So I'll see if I can come up with one before I finish talking. But I think it's just a couple basic things about kind of teaching history, and a couple of things that maybe set me out of it a few years ago is that it's just the basic design of it. I mean, you look at like world history in California. You're supposed to teach world history in 8.5 months. I mean, the history of the entire world. So just setting it up like that, you've already kind of decided we're going to leave a ton of stuff out. And the stuff we're going to go over, we're going to go over on a really surface level, because it's just, you know, if you're trying to rush to get through all the curriculum, it's impossible. It's just not a good setup from the beginning. Secondly, that everybody has to learn the exact same history in the exact same way, which is really tough. You know, I had a student talking to me a couple of days ago, and he said, you know, we've been doing all these social emotional learning courses and activities about how we need to embrace ourselves as individuals, that we're all different. And then I thought it was just so powerful. He says, yet we all go and take the exact same classes and learn the exact same way, and do the exact same assignments. And you're like, that's really profound. And I'm glad you made that connection, but I'm sorry you had to, you know, realize that too. But I think that, you know, with the media design and art, I think the big thing is like, that's what the kids are doing right now. And it's what all of us would have been doing if we had the same access to this media design and art years ago. It's not like it's just this generation that's interested in it, you know, through human history, right? Cave paintings, all that kind of stuff. That's who we are. We just now have the technology that's allowing us to do that on a daily basis. And so it's tough when, you know, I'll talk to some teachers where they say, well, I don't have that art background, because I do have an art background. Say I don't have that art background, so I'm not really an art teacher. Well, you know, not to be, I try not to be rude when I say this, but, you know, your students aren't textbook learners either. So when we have them do that, you know, I mean, it's just, how many of us ever look at a textbook on our own when we're stumped at home? You know, like I was just changing doorknobs the other day, and I was about to look at the instructions that come with it, and I said, nope, I'm going to Google it. And first thing I found a video, and 30 seconds later, I got it. You know, I know it's a much simpler example than complex historical issues, but that's the way we're learning now. And so I think it's just a natural thing to include. And lastly, I came up with this idea, or I started pushing this idea at our site, probably a few years ago, but it came into fruition. See, my motion sensor lights just turned off in here. Sorry. I'll get them in a second once I shut up. But I think the last year or two has proven you really can't learn about civics and history without including media in there. And in today's world, social media, you can't separate those things. They're just such a huge impact on, our collective narrative.
I think that's fantastic. And we will share very soon. Nick's going to share some of the stuff that he did with his class in relation to that too. So I think that's really important to sort of see the how. How do you do it, right? Because that's the hardest bit. But before we get to that, I mean, we talked a little bit about that. We haven't really talked much about barriers. We talked a little bit and brushed on it. And I think we've got the why. We know the why at the moment. But, Nwana, I'm just curious. I mean, for me, when I was teaching history many years ago, there were a lot of barriers. I worked in Australia, but we have some of the same issues in Australia as you do have in the United States. And things aren't changing as much as I would personally like, but they are better. But from your lens and from the people that you've worked with, what are some of the biggest barriers that you see to using art, media, and design, apart from some of the stuff we've touched on earlier?
I think another barrier to utilizing art, media, and design really is almost a language barrier. Typically, educators don't speak the same language as the learners. Learners speak TikTok and YouTube. And educators don't typically speak that same language. So I think that there is a disconnect and a devaluing of the language that students have chosen to communicate with, because it's not the language that we communicate with. So I think that disconnect is a huge barrier. And so we have to learn to speak each other's language in order to get engagement and to actually communicate with our students so that learning becomes meaningful.
Is part of that speaking the language, is it a question of letting go a bit as an educator and letting them teach us a bit? Because I mean, let's be fair, they're a bit better at it than us.
Yes,
well, speaking for myself.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's about letting go, right? And I don't know about other educators, but I can be a little bit of a control freak, just a tinky bit.
Me too.
So, you know,
Hands up,
I think,
me too.
right? So I think that once you decide that you're a learner too, it reframes that dynamic between you and the student. So I think that's key, because as an educator, I would hope we all seek to be lifelong learners.
Absolutely, thank you. I mean, Nick, I'm going to ask you a similar question. Look at barriers, and I know that you've used a lot of media in your class, which we'll talk about very soon. Were there any barriers to getting that off the ground? I mean, you're actually using Twitter with your classes, you know, for example, which is like a no-go zone across the world. I mean, Australia, UK, US, right? I'm curious to hear a bit about your the barriers that you might have faced. I'm sure there were. Tell me how did it go? How did you do it?
How long is this webinar? I'll try to bullet point it, but to kind of go back to something Noana was saying real quick about language, and where social media is kind of helped. Their first unit project, which was just due this week, they had to do a Twitter thread, kind of tracing a theme through history that we've been talking about. And one of the hardest things to do was to get them to talk like a normal human. I said, don't write to me like a teacher. That'll be boring. I don't want to read that. Your audience is the world, not one teacher that's going to read this and then it's going to go nowhere ever again, right? Your goal is hopefully you're producing something that's going to make somebody out there interested in this and maybe explore this topic a little bit. And if you write like you're writing in a traditional class, no one's going to click on this. No one's going to look at it. And then just real quick with the TikTok thing, I had this lesson I was so excited about last year. I thought I was going to trick all students, where we're talking about Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin. And I'm like, no one's heard of Claudette Colvin, you know, and I'm just going to prove my point here. And probably almost 25% of the kids knew about Claudette Colvin, who I didn't even know about when I was going through my history credential program, because of TikTok, you know, and you can't dismiss that. Like, that is a really powerful tool, so that people like that can have their stories told where they're not being discussed or included in a traditional textbook. So I think that's an exciting part. But so for the barriers, it's tough. I work at a really good school, and sometimes change is harder in a good school because they're not that same motivation to try out new things. So it's really been years in the process of trying to kind of come with a different program. It wasn't necessarily going to be a history platform, but just talking with students, kind of doing my own informal user testing with kids. And you know, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, asking the question at the end of a year, that was a little frustrating, and just asking them, you know, I just had them raise their hands. How many of you like school? Or no, so how many of you like most of your teachers in class? Almost everybody raised their hand. And I said, how many of you hate school? Everybody raised their hand. You know, and you just kind of go, how is that happening? And so I was able to work with a group of teachers and create a little design group. And one of the first things we did was we did a shadow a student. And so we just kind of went through their day with them, which was really eye-opening. And we got some really good information. I'm still hoping we can implement some of the things we got out of there, but just that none of their classes connected. Even there were some really interesting things going on, but if they were in 5 or 6 classes a day about totally different subjects, there was just no overlap, and it was hard to get that depth and, you know, that long-term memory on those things. So that's kind of what started doing it. I didn't know it would be a history thing right away. But so I think one of the barriers are just, I guess with anything in public schools, stuff like that, is kind of working through some of the politics and the bureaucracy, if there's just so many, every time you think you have an approval or a yes, there's another, like you didn't know there's another group or another level that you'd have to speak to. And for me personally, of doing this, mine's a CTE class, a history class, and an art class. So that's 3 departments of people that were concerned how it would affect them. As for the students, that literally March 12th, I don't know, March 13th is as big of a day to everybody else, but for us over here on the West Coast, that was when everything shut down in 2020. March 12th, I did a quick little, ran through all the history classrooms I could and gave like a 3-minute pitch on the class. And so the student response was overwhelming of how many people wanted to sign up for it. But then, master schedule and things like that, those became a little bit tricky. And then once school shut down, it got a little bit harder, but we were able to get one section of it at least to kind of start us off. But I guess, I think one of the things is tradition, right? Because we've always done it that way. So we're always going to keep doing it that way. That's probably the biggest barrier.
Absolutely. And I think the more conversations we have around this and the more examples of how to do it that we have, it just makes it easier for people to imagine what it could be. And obviously there are issues of access and equity, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And some of the resources that we have will help you potentially have a media lens on your class without actually going onto Twitter, for example, so that you're able to then still tap into the things that they're into without getting you into trouble with the parent body or the community or the because there are different, I know that there are a lot of you coming from different situations and different kind of regions who have a different tolerance level of certain things. And so, you've got to keep your life easy. So we do have some workarounds to that as well. So I guess this is Nwana, I'm really keen to hear now from you a little bit about how do we do it. There are these barriers. It can be a challenge, but from your experience and from what you've seen, what's the best approach, or how would you attack this if you're coming new into doing this?
Sure. Well, first I'll speak to this whole idea of speaking the same language as a student. I think that Google is a great example of opening yourself up to becoming a learner, because they have something called Genius Hour. Have you ever heard of that? Right? Genius Hour. Yeah. So they open it up and allow the employees to kind of lead this think tank process where they can be as creative as they can possibly be. And it always ends up with something fabulous that they make a lot of money off of. Right? So if you have that same sort of framework that you approach learning and teaching, then you allow your students voice and choice, and you allow yourself to step into that role of learner from that voice and choice. And they will always, always, hands down, surprise you. I can't tell you how many students came up with the most amazing things. I didn't know they knew how to use Maya and create a completely animated film on bullying. I would have never given them that task had I not stepped back and allowed them to take control of the steering wheel. So I think that's one of my best pieces of advice and suggestions, is to sometimes allow them to take hold of that steering wheel and lead the learning. You're there. You can always take the steering wheel back if you need to, right? Kind of like teaching a young person to drive, but you're allowing them that opportunity and that space to have growth when you do that.
Yeah, I love that. I've got a question for you, an additional question actually for you as well. One of the things that I used to love as a history teacher was before media. Media was a big thing, right? That will tell you how old I am, guys. But it was more about using art and design. and incorporating that within my an art as in music, visual, the works. And for me, that was the best part of my history teaching, as well as the most interesting for me, as well as the students. The thing is, I know that it's overwhelming for a lot of educators to sort of make that leap into using this kind of an approach. What would be your way of getting in there and just giving it a go? Because art history is complicated, right? Like you think you got a handle on it, and then you're like, oh my God, I didn't think about X, Y, and Z. So none of, for me, if I was to go back in the classroom, how could you help me do that again? Because I'm not sure I did it well. I liked it.
Well, here's what I would say. I would say that, in my personal opinion, the foundation of art and design is storytelling.
Yes.
And when you consider it from that point of view, I mean, from the time we're children, we tell stories, we listen to stories, we enjoy stories. Stories create an immersive experience.
Yeah.
So if you consider the fact that music is a story, art is a story, graphic design is a story, then it doesn't necessarily feel as overwhelming, I think, because we all understand stories. We have a lot of experience with stories. So you don't have to be an art teacher to utilize art. We're all storytellers, right? It's just another avenue of telling a story. So I would say be a little brave, because it is familiar. If you really take a second and step back, it is.
Yeah, I love that. And I was just actually, when you were saying that, I was sort of reading the story of the White House the other day, for instance, and it is a story, and it's a story, really interesting one, actually. And it's funny because some of these things we take for granted in our own space, in our own areas. I mean, I'm an Australian, and the history of Melbourne and the architecture of Melbourne is really fascinating to me. And I used to teach it to my students. And actually they were like, oh my God, we've got Gothic buildings. That's kind of like, and then we learn about Gothic architecture and they're like, oh, okay, Melbourne's not so boring after all, right? And I guess it just makes it that more relevant. Thank you. That's really great advice. So Nick, tell us a little bit about how you do. Do you want me to show your slide with some other stuff? Would that be, put that on there?
Sure. If you'd like to.
Sure.
Put that on there.
So tell us about what you did, because you've done all number of things. And how do you do it, and how have you done it?
I don't know. No. I think, just to kind of reemphasize what Noana had said, that's what you see that 9/11 student project. I don't teach them anything about video editing, any of the technical side of it at all when we do that. We do that, I think, the second week of school, and it's all about storytelling. And we use Netflix for this year. Netflix had a new, I think, 6-part documentary series on 9/11. And so as they go through the project, we watch some of the Netflix documentary and see like what techniques are being used. And we kind of see it through there, where, don't tell my students, but most of the edits they are doing, I don't know how to do myself, and I do have an art and design background and things like that. But for the most part, it's about, the technology will change. They can Google or watch YouTube to figure out how to use the different platforms to make videos, but the basics of telling a story are really consistent throughout time, right? And so I think that's kind of the focus, kind of staying along. How do you connect, like, who is your audience, and how do you kind of create something that will connect directly with them? And so that's what, this, and then even the Unit 1 Twitter thread is kind of that same thing, that they're telling a story. They're not giving me a list of things that happened in history, and that's really hard for them to do. And as you know, they really tend to enjoy the class before we get to this first big unit, and then all of a sudden they're starting to get a little stumped because they're used to normal tests where it's maybe a multiple choice, or they're writing an essay based on what they've been told, where this is like they have to create their story based off of some historical things we've gone over. And so that's kind of putting it in their hands.
So I was just going to, sorry to interrupt, I was just really curious. You're saying the Twitter thread was their assessment and they were telling stories via Twitter.
Yeah, that's
kind of cool, man.
Yeah, that's their Unit 1 project. And what's really neat, talking to them as they're creating these, you know, I keep telling them to take away the, like, you know, they'll use the events as support for their story, but I'm like, don't explain the event. Nobody's gonna like dig deep into that one Twitter post for that, but tie it back to your story and do it that way. And what's really neat about that is you see, and they have to struggle with it a little bit, but you see how much better they have to understand that actual event to connect it to a story rather than just knowing what happened. But what does this mean? What theme is throughout history, right? A lot of kids looked at free speech through, you know, because our first unit is on democracy, compromise, and communication. And we start, you know, from the Independence Day to till today, right? And how do we see those themes coming out? And they have to use those events and visuals to do that. And we also talk about that, how many visuals will help that story, right? And, you know, if you look at Twitter engagement, how much it increases if you're using visuals. And then the other thing is just, I didn't know exactly what we were going to do in this class the first year. I let them, you know, as one of my tips later on is be co-creators in the class, right? And giving them a say in it as we go was really kind of a neat way to, you know, get into it. And well, I don't know if I stole this quote from somebody, but I tell my students all the time, the hardest thing about starting is starting, so just start. And that's kind of what we did, right? Like I could sit here for the next 10 years and try to get this program perfect before we, you know, release it for students, but you know, it's never going to be perfect. So just start, and then we can kind of learn as we're going and adjust it, and getting continuous feedback from students. And I know I'm a little off topic here, but I think one of the things I did, and I do in all my classes, but what's weird is I'll ask students, you know, what's working, what's not in class, and they give me like a little assessment review, and they're very timid to say it because they're afraid to like make the teacher mad or whatever. But once they start saying it, it's good. But what's really remarkable is when I ask the kids this, they say they've never been asked that before in school of like what's working in the class or not. And I mean, just a quick example, we were learning about the Scopes monkey trial last week, and I gave them 3 resources. 2 were websites and 1 was a video, and we voted on which one we wanted to learn Scopes monkey trial through, and overwhelmingly it was the video. It was a 6-minute video. And they talked about how they liked how it was using normal, everyday, modern language, not, you know, some outdated stuff that they had to figure out what it was. And then we actually just looked at the 2 websites and looked at how one looked like a clean, professional website, and one looked like, you know, one of the original GeoCities websites from like the 90s or whatever. And I was saying, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that that information was incorrect, but see the power that design has on even our willingness to engage in information.
I love that. And also it just, my head's like media literacy, digital literacy. There's been so many other kind of great things that come from that are just part of it. There's the lights again. Nick, do you want me to show everyone a little bit of the 9/11 student project?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great. I think that one's only a minute long. Yeah.
Okay, let's show that, because I think it's a good example of seeing what kids can do without much teaching. Can we all see that? Oh, can you see it? Hang on, let me just stop sharing for 1 second. And I think it might.
And if you want me, the other link up there is our first semester final that we did last year, where it was a class final that they all collaborated to make a video about, like kind of the history of war and conflict in the United States. And we did all of that remotely last year, which was kind of extra cool that they were able to pull.
Yes, kind of cool. I'll link all these to the resources guide so you can get access to them. But can you see can we see the 9/11 on my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
I can't hear it, but I can see it.
No, I can't hear it either, which is very weird. Let's just see if it. Oh, that's weird. Okay, so there's no sound, but when I send this to you, you can get the links. But it's pretty powerful, actually. It looks real, like a real documentary. I can't believe they did that without much. This is the thing, these kids that we teach are just kind of amazing.
and just, obviously 9/11 is just a really tough time to talk about. It's not, especially the second week of school, but, we would have kids tearing up watching other kids' videos, and like it's such a great group of kids, so like they were all it was very supportive and stuff. But I said, when's the last time you teared up or felt emotional reading your history textbook? And there was just such a great kind of like point to kind of that they were engaging there. We could only watch a few of these at a time. It took me a while to grade them because it was just so heavy to watch so many of these, because it just had so much of that emotional. I was talking to a student before this started, and she just said, it's different because we're not learning just the normal stuff, but we're actually seeing it as a human story. And I was just like, oh, that's so cool that you would say it that way, because it brought the humanity and the life back into it, I think, when you're using media.
Absolutely. I think what I'm hearing from you guys is to speak the kids' language, jump right in, maybe let them take a bit of control. It's hard. Noana, I'm a bit like you. It's like, give too much control, it could be mayhem. Actually, I'm not going to lie, sometimes it was. But it's giving up, because we're not taught to do that. That's not how educators have been trained. It's almost like we're wired a certain way because of the messages we're hearing, and it's hard to give over. And I think like before, like in the last little section, I want you to talk a little bit about the pitch, because Noana, this is something I'll talk to you about as well, because like you're involved in the content that we create for Untold. This is like a final thing. This is how Nick and I met, actually. And I'd like, Nick, for you to talk a little bit about the pitch. And whilst we did this together with you did it with us as the media company, there are ways that you could approach, there are ways that you could supercharge this for your classroom in a way, with getting media companies or not involved, right? So Nick, can you tell us what's the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's so cool about how this all comes kind of full circle. I believe it was the assignment or the activity I gave the students to look at the Untold History page and find a video, and then try to amplify that story by putting it on their Twitter. And I think that's when you kind of said, well, who are all these people posting all these videos? And we're able to get in connection with that, and it just kind of worked out perfectly. It really helped, in my opinion, help validate the class of kind of the concept of the class, that of kind of connecting outside of the classroom, and making real stories. And again, moving away from just that like consumption model of history, where you're just kind of hearing it, and instead kind of being an active participant in it. And so, yeah, when you reached out, and we got to chat about this idea, it seemed like kind of an idea that I was planning to do for them kind of at the end of the year anyways, but this gave that real audience that was kind of the goal of the class, for students to research different ideas and stories that they thought were important, that people should know about, and then being able to work with Make-O-Matic and your colleagues. They're able to learn more about social media techniques, how to make a pitch, and that's really hard for all of us, especially me, as you can tell while I'm rambling on. But like, how do you get your point across really quickly? Because most of the time in school, we're trying to fill up a certain amount of pages, where after it's like, okay, how do you convey that information as succinctly as possible? And so that was really neat for them to they got really excited about, especially after a rough year, with, you know, the pandemic and the different environments that we were all in, to have this opportunity to do that. And they got excited that they could, you know, connect with real, you know, organizations out there across the world, and that their voice mattered and what they were interested in mattered and could be part of school, not where you go to school to learn certain stuff and then all the stuff you're interested in, you have to do outside of school. And so how can we kind of overlap those things if we want kids to really be more bought in and engaged? And just a quick follow-up, a student after that pitch came and talked to me. She's a senior this year. How she started a business. I think it's some kind of like thrift clothes or something like that. And based off of that pitch project and learning more about social media and how to leverage it, and was telling me how well that business is doing, that she started over the summer, based off kind of the things we were going over in the class, which I thought was really, really neat.
Oh my gosh. So for guys who are listening, the Pitch Project was a project that we run under the Untold resource banner. We, as you can see, we work with so many great organizations, but the DFI Institute, you don't have a logo, other the Driving Force Institute are the main sort of inspiration behind that. And then we have the likes of Nuana as one of our super awesome subject matter experts. And this content is about telling as many diverse stories as possible around American history and civics education. So Nick's wonderful class shared the Claudette Colvin, one of our Claudette Colvin videos, and I was like, who's this? And then I realized it must have been a class. So I fortunately was able to connect with them. And we worked with Nick and also High Tech High in California. And we created a competition where the students pitched us ideas for video content. We needed more videos about environmental history and also around Indigenous stories. And so they were the two sort of parameters that we placed, which was great because it's topics that are interesting to those two particular audiences anyway. They pitched us ideas with a 1-minute video on TikTok, on whatever they want. You know, there was no restriction. They used their own media skills. We ran workshops with them to help them do that. And then we produced their videos. So hopefully the sound's working. I'm going to quickly just show you one of the pictures, the finished product. And then I'm going to just draw your attention to some amazing resources that we have that can help you use design, media, and art in your history classes as well. So let's hope, if not, I will send the PowerPoint and everyone can check this. So this is Annabelle from Nick's class, and she did a pitch on the origins of Earth Day. Okay, so there's no sound. That's exciting. Okay. So this is, as usual, you know, media can be great, but also it can also cause challenges, right? So this is, but I will send this to you, but I would love you to have a look, because the pictures themselves, they didn't have to be that hi-fi. We were looking for the ideas personally, even though we're a media company, to be honest. But the video, the media element was the engagement element, right? And we ran workshops and stuff on how to use media and all that kind of stuff. But we're more interested in the historical research they did, and also their pitching skills and the way they told a story. So to be honest, it wasn't even about, but the media was the thing that was the hooks for them, as well as, you know, also having a finished product, which you can't hear at the moment, but I will send you the link. And, you know, we finished and Annabelle was really happy with the product, but there's no videos out there around the origins of Earth Day. So we should be telling that story. Who knew in the 1970s they were talking about this? We're definitely not listening, that's for sure. I actually learned something really, really, really interesting. And so this is kind of the content that was produced by that. So because we can't hear it anyway, I'll move on, but I will send you these links. I think, you know, there's so many other resources. So I've been talking a little bit about Untold. Untold History is an initiative that we have. We won a Best Digital Resource badge recently. So from the American Libraries Association, that's kind of cool. But, you know, we work with experts and to create this content. It's super important. But in terms of art and media, what what content have we created to help you be better at helping that in your classroom. So we've created a couple of series, which we'll definitely provide links to. I'll be sending an email to everyone just to make sure that you have all these resources. Art That Changed America is an amazing series that we created around looking at the impact of art on America. And Nwana's been a big influence on this one, and we obviously, you know why we've got her to help out with that. It's proven to be one, when I do user testing, one of the most, not surprisingly, but I think it just blows teachers' minds when they see it, the Chicano art movement, Harlem Renaissance or Renaissance, depending on how you want to say it. You know, they're not stories that are told from that perspective that often, or very rarely, certainly not in video form. And so these videos, I think we've got about 25 of them now, with some with discussion guides and some not. They're there to help you and to really, and they are part of a curriculum. You know, it is curriculum aligned because it fits in with, you know, if you're looking at the Chicano, civil rights, why not look at the art? You know, like, makes sense to me. Museum of Artifacts That Made America is another series. It's less about art, it's about material objects, but surely we could consider them art as well, you know, and there's a whole lot of animated resources that will help you with that. And we've also created a whole series with the Peeps in Kentucky Valley Community Cooperative around how to use media to teach social studies. And these resources are all available to you and will be sent to you after the webinar as well, because, you know, we just want people to have more confidence and availability of good, really good resources. But also, and then there's more. Oh, so this is one of the discussion guides. I think, Nwana, this might have been the one that you made.
Right.
And not all of them are as it's incredible. Not all of them are as comprehensive as this one. But you'll see there's some guidance on helping you use that video with your class if you're a bit rushed for time, or you're not that confident in or, you know, around that topic. And you'll see it's very practical stuff. Really good links to stuff, to things that you need, and also a creative activity at the end should you want to do that. All the stuff that I'm going to send you today will be via our community. I will be sending you all a link, and in the courses section you'll be able to access all of these resources. The page is really long with all the stuff, but you'll see that there's more stuff than you'll ever need, but it's there for you should you want. And the final thing, and this fits in with what we're doing as well, I want to plug some of the resources that Prime Video and the Do-Goodery have created in relation to the stuff that we're talking about today. They're really great media resources with discussion guides, and I've linked those to the resources, but obviously if you took a photo of the website, you can access them there. There's amazing media resources, discussion guides, lesson plans, all that kind of stuff that you might need in order to fully embrace and use media in your classroom. Knock yourselves out. It's there for the taking. If you don't use it, it's your loss, in my opinion. And it's all free, right? Like, we're not, you know, that's the other thing. It's there to be used, so please use it. And also there's us to contact. You know, I've got my email there, but if you wanted to connect with Nwana or Nick, just send me an email and I'll introduce you. There's no problem doing that, because we are here to support and hopefully get more people to be using media and art and design in their classes. Hopefully this has made it that little bit easier. But to finish off, because I've been yabbiting on for a bit, I just want to get a top tip from our two presenters. What's your top tip? What's your key takeaway? What is the one thing that we should all be doing, or you would recommend that we do? Let's start with you, Nwana.
Me? Top tip. Let go. Let go and just try something different. The worst thing that will happen is that you fail and you'll still learn from that.
Love it. Love it. Oh, let go. Yes. Never wiser words were spoken. Love it. Nick, talk to me.
Yeah, I think I mentioned a couple already with kind of co-creating with your students and then running those usability tests or constant feedback from your students, and all the resources you just went over, because it was the first year using them. I got a lot of feedback from my students and they loved them. I had kids even asking me to share them with other history teachers on our site, so that their friends could see them in class. So that was really cool. But I know Nawana mentioned a Google Genius Hour earlier. The other Google reference I'd like to make is the Moonshot Project, or their 10X project that I heard about a few years ago at a conference, but of like willing to really make a big change. And I know sometimes that can be intimidating to start, but you know, as we get back to normal, it kind of worries me a little bit, because I don't know if normal was working for everyone in school. So this is our opportunity to kind of really change what we're doing, and kind of think of those big ideas of what's drastically different, right? Like, my students will never see a textbook and will read very few articles. And I'm not saying reading isn't important or anything, but they do that in almost all of their other classes is their primary way of, you know, seeing information, but that's not what they're doing outside of class. So I like the just kind of that 10X. If it's not, you know, 10 times better, you're maybe not going far enough.
I love it. I love it. No, and I think that's a really good point. And I did forgot to mention, actually, just as a final point, is that for those of you who media would definitely, for example, going onto social media, I know media can be used within a classroom easily. The professional development series that we've created has loads of ideas of how you can take it offline, right? But still use media vibes. So I forgot to mention that before, because I did reference that earlier. It's in that social media stuff, and I'll make some reference of the videos that you should watch, because there's a really great activity in there for history teachers that I was thinking if I was in the classroom, I would steal. Not steal, use, because obviously they're to be shared. But it does help, particularly for those of you who are working in districts or in schools that have less access, and things like that. We don't want to exclude our youngsters just because of that. It's not cool. Yeah, so there is stuff on there in that for you as well. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for spending your time with us today. Super excited about the stuff that you've shared with us. And hopefully this has inspired everyone here to actually use these resources and to have the courage to use art, media, and design in your classes. And if you've got any questions, reach out to me. And if you need to speak to these guys, you know, I'm happy to make that introduction. So have a great day, or evening, because it's morning for me, evening for you guys. Bye, guys.